Here with the gift of bread, and she is going to be teaching us today. I'm telling you, if you could only smell this kitchen right now, because she's been here baking and it smells fabulous. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Tammy and Chris. And today I want to first make this light wheat bread.
Right.
And it's a teddy bear shape here. I like making little animals, and you can make anything out of this because it's a dough that has the consistency to retain the shape and yet puff up in the oven. Some, you know, a batter bread just would flow all over the place.
Right.
So we want to make sure we have the right type. And I'm going to take a cup of white flour and just put about half of that in there. And the same with my wheat flour, just put about half of this, about half a cup of wheat flour. And then I'm going to put in my sugar and my yeast. Now, I'm only going to use half a package of yeast, so I've already measured that out. And put in some salt and stir this together. Now, most of the time with the yeast bread, I dissolve it in water first for 10 minutes. You have to dissolve yeast 10 minutes. It never tells you that in most recipes.
Right.
And that'll work well, but in this one, it dissolves this way partly because that means the rising will start later, and we have time to shape it.
Okay, I understand now.
Bit. And so we're going to add in our milk and butter. I melted butter in warm milk. And then we're adding in our egg. And
now, is that just the yolk?
No, that's the whole egg.
Okay.
But because I'd halved the recipe for today, it's only half an egg. Now, most people say, how can you put half an egg in a recipe? And it's you just take that egg and you beat it up and you measure out half, which is really an eighth of a cup.
Right.
And so you can do that. Now that I've done that, now I'm going to add in as much of this flour as I can to make my dough.
I think we're going to burn that many.
Well, it depends on how hard it is.
My warm water in here, and that'll help it stir up a lot better.
Yeah.
That liquid makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like it. Well, you know, baby, that's not going to burn that many calories.
Well, then we need to make it harder then.
Make it harder to make so we can burn the calories so we can eat it.
Yeah.
I know. I walked into this place today and I was like, oh my goodness, this just smells dangerous in here.
And then as I get this together, I'm going to take my board and I'm going to start to knead it. So I think I have more flour than I need right there. And this will work its way into it. Do you know what the word lady means?
What the word?
Lady.
No.
A lady. It means loaf kneader, bread kneader.
Oh, is that what it means?
Yes, it does. Isn't that funny?
That is funny.
That's where it's an old English word that means the kneader of the bread. We push the loaves.
We push it. Okay.
So
well, nowadays they go to the grocery store, but it's not near the same, is it?
No, it's not. And, you know, I grew up in the restaurant business and started making bread when I was just a little girl, which was very nice. But I look back and I had ancestors that came to Connecticut in the 1630s.
Right.
And the first thing they did was they made a grist mill. And they, you know, grew their wheat and milled it into flour at that mill, which is in Milford, Connecticut.
Right.
The old wheel is still there, and they came over to also preach the word.
Right.
And were ministers for a number of generations, really. So that was, you know, just something that my family did. And I think that's part of why I just have this love of bread. And making bread. I like kneading it and filling it in my hands as it starts to get pliable and more elastic, as well as I get that right feel of how it ought to be, if I need a little more flour on it or anything.
You know, I haven't done it as often. I guess because it's just been busy around this place. But my kids like, especially my daughter, when I make challah bread, and they'll come in the kitchen with me, and and she just likes to sit there and knead it and play with it. To her, I think it's more playtime.
Yes,
and
it's like
just
Play-Doh, but you can
eat
eat it after you cook it. Well, my children loved it when they were living in Connecticut. At one point, my husband was Coast Guard, my late husband, and we were stationed up there. And I would time it so the whole wheat bread would be ready as they came in the door on a cold winter day from school.
Right.
And they would just sit around that table and start talking. And that really, you know, breaking bread together, it's such a thing in the Bible for us to break bread together, but it also gives us that fellowship and opens up hearts. We really start talking as we break bread. And now we're just going to let that sit there under our towel for about 10 minutes before we do the next step of that.
Okay.
Now, what does that do? Let it sit there for 10 minutes with the towel.
It just starts the slight little rising on that. Now, after I shape it into the teddy bear shape, or, you know, I could do a different one, but we're doing the bear today, then we let it rise for 30 minutes before we cook it.
Right.
So that then it will rise in the oven again. The heat will help it rise.
So we're only going to partially let it rise right now.
Yeah,
so we can
just
start
the
shaping
10
it.
minutes is all we're going to do right now.
Okay.
And then we can start shaping it, and we'll be just, you know, fine with all that.
Right.
And we can just be thinking about bread. You know, one of the reasons I wanted to write about bread and talk about bread a lot is there's a threefold purpose of bread in the Bible. Do you know what those three purposes are?
I would have to ask you.
Not right off.
Okay, one is sustenance. You know, the first thing God said to Adam when he had to leave the Garden of Eden was, you will have to work by the sweat of your brow for bread. And it's for us to realize the need for bread so that we can realize the spiritual need for the bread of life.
Ooh, that's good.
And then the second one is fellowship, the breaking bread together, that we break bread with one another because it brings us into community, it brings us in communion. And the third one, of course, is covenant relationship with God. In the Old Testament, they had the altar with the bread of presence there as a symbol of the covenant with God. In the New Testament, we had Jesus who said, I am the bread of life. And he gave us the new covenant at the Last Supper.
Yes.
And so I'm so thrilled to always think about bread and I like that for fellowship. One of the things I do at Christmas time, I make Christmas breads, and I bring them to all my neighbors, and I give them bread. And I've done this for, well, I guess, you know, I was married 38 years. I've been widowed several years. I did it from the beginning of my marriage on.
Right. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so you get to know your neighbors, but you also have opportunities sometimes as you're giving them bread to talk about bread and Jesus, the bread of life, which I think is so important for us to be able to do.
Right. Now, do you do some of that in your book? Talk about that?
I do. There's stories, heartwarming stories all through the book.
So this book isn't just recipes.
No,
Tell us about your book.
There's 60 recipes in the book.
Right.
But the book is actually three things. It's an inspirational cookbook. So there is a heartwarming story around bread, usually from my life or lives of friends and other people. And then there's an insight into bread in the Bible. So when I'm talking about the light wheat bread, I'm actually talking about Ruth and Naomi in that chapter.
Right.
Because of Ruth cleaning the bread and Naomi telling her, don't go to another field, stay in Boaz's field.
Right.
And that was that gleaning to get that wheat, of course, which goes into the bread, and the harvest celebration was in there. So that's all part of what's in the book, as well as there's tips on making bread. So if you didn't know how to make yeast bread, it doesn't come out well, or your quick breads aren't coming out well, there's tips on what happened that caused that to not rise up as well as you wanted it to.
Right.
So all of that goes on in the book. And the heartwarming stories, you know, some of them, like when I was little, I can remember one time making bread with my grandmother who lived 2 houses from me. They owned the restaurant. I said, Grandma, how come you always make 2 loaves of bread? And she said, well, 2 is always better than 1 because there's always someone who needs bread. We want bread in our house, but we want to give bread. And she showed me a calendar she kept in her purse. When someone died, she circled a month out and 6 months out, and on both of those days, she brought them a loaf of bread.
How neat is that?
I know, isn't that wonderful? She said they're
Yes.
still grieving, and they're still grieving, and she wanted to let them know people were still caring
Still caring
about
and
that.
thinking about that.
Yes.
That's wonderful because a lot of people, they have people right there, but then everybody's gone.
That's right. And they're still facing a lot of loneliness and a lot of hard times. And so she had, you know, that happening with her. Just checking the time here. We have a couple more minutes before that's done. But, you know, we just should be thinking about bread as Jesus is the bread of life. What can we do to show other people the love of Jesus? How can we share? What did Jesus do? How often did he share bread? You know, he fed 5,000. He fed thousands. He had supper with the disciples. And I think that's another example for us to think about breaking bread with other people, making that bread for other people, because that's so important.
Now I've seen bread at a completely different light.
I'm just seeing it as carbs. That's all I've ever seen that has is carbs.
But you know, if you go without your carbs and you have problems with it, you're going to have problems with your bones.
Yeah.
You're going to have fractures and breaks and things. And there is 3% of the population that are actually allergic to the wheats, those types of grains. But most of the population is not, and they actually do need it. They
Right.
don't need the empty sugary carbs, but they do need some good carbs.
Right.
And some whole grains.
The whole grains.
Yeah. And I usually make lots of wheat bread with just wheat. This one,
Right.
as I said, is a light wheat bread because it lends itself to being able to be shaped, and that's fun. And
Right.
you know, children for a party, how much fun is it to have a teddy bear bread and not so much worry about the cake or the cupcakes?
Right. Well, to me, I'm thinking of, because, you know, I have a daughter and my son who loves to be in the kitchen with me.
Mm-hmm.
And how much fun would it be for them to spend time with them in the kitchen and to make this with them and
Yes.
let them make their own little shapes.
Yes.
And make their own little characters.
Right, and when my grandchildren come now, they make bread with me. But my
Right.
children grew up making bread with me and having a lot of fun with doing that. So it's, you know, very easy to bring people into your kitchen. And I have a big kitchen because I do like to cook with other people. I like to
Right.
have people over. I like to be making bread, and my grandchildren like to make bread also. And so that's just, and that's, I grew up cooking with everybody. My grandfather cooked, my uncles cooked, my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers, my great-grandmother. I cooked with them all.
Right. That's what I tell Chris. I said, when we have a new house, I want a kitchen that's open to the living area because to me, everything starts in the kitchen. You know, the
Yes.
socializing, everything starts in the kitchen.
And that's how my house is. That's the center of my house, is my
Right.
kitchen. And it's nice and big, so I can do a lot there. But, you know, that's what we want to do. We want to invite people into our home, not just that front fancy parlor,
Right.
but come see how I live, come be with me, and walk alongside me and share bread.
That's right.
I'm
Well, is
gonna
this
get
rice
pan.
enough now?
Yes,
So we can
I
go
think
ahead
we can
and
take that off.
have fun.
Yes, and now we're going to
Now
be
you have
making
grease on this already?
I did. I already greased that. I just used a little spray grease, and I'm going to make my big ball for the belly.
Okay.
You can, and we're going to be making 4 similar shaped ones for the ears, about equal. I mean the paws.
Paws.
And then we have a couple smaller ones we're going
Okay.
to do for the ears. If you want to roll any of
We're gonna
those
start
into
rolling
balls,
these?
you can do that. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have some fun here. No, I wouldn't throw it at you, honey.
That's all right.
All right.
You have to wait another 10 minutes for it to rise if you do that.
If I throw it at you?
Yeah.
He'd deflate anything. Is that what he's trying
Is that
to
what
say?
he's saying? I don't know.
It is dirty.
All right.
Throw it at me.
I wouldn't do such a thing. At least not on air. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do it anyway.
Now these are going to be our ears, so we're going to shape it into a ball, and then we're going to kind of curve it a little bit and put that around for our little
Oh, how
ears.
cute.
And we're going to put this on, and we're going to just, oh wait a minute, I didn't do one more ball. I got to divide this up a little bit more here.
Oh, we got to miss the head,
I forgot
didn't
the
we?
head.
Oh, we need a head.
I know, wouldn't that be funny?
Okay, so is
So,
that good for the body?
yeah, that'll be fine for the body. And
Okay,
we're gonna,
there's our
it's
body.
going to rise up nice and fat, so we can just do that and put one
There's
ear
our
on
head.
here. And we're going to flip the other ear around here. And then we're going to put our little paws on everywhere.
I was always told not to play with my food.
Well, I think this
And
is an
now-
exception.
I'm going to take chocolate chips and stick them in here for the eyes.
All right, you're
upside
speaking my
down.
language now.
Now you're speaking his language, right?
You can put them all over that if you want. I like chocolate chips.
I'm going to make a little tiny nose here.
All right. Oh, look how cute.
Yeah, and then I'm going to form a little
mouth.
roll to make the mouth, yes. So we're going to have that in there, and we're going to have our little teddy bear. So we got the mouth, the nose, little eyes, and you know, the
So now we're going to let
paws and
this
all.
set and
We're going to let
rise.
that sit, and this is going to come up as big as that when it's done. But we're
Okay.
going to
I just thought that was
just
his
put that
mini-me.
aside to
His mini-me. All right, so while we set that aside,